If you're just getting into photography or video work using a DSLR, there are quite literally hundreds, if not thousands, of different kinds of lenses that you can buy. Now, of course, which one do you buy? What's important in the makings of a lens? This will be a bit of a basic video because I imagine that for the most part, people getting this are people that are more introductory into video or camera work on DSLRs, but there will be a bit more advanced stuff as well. Now, when it comes to picking a lens for you, there's really three things you need to remember. One is the mount type. Are we talking about Nikon, Canon, or Sony, for example, because different lenses are made for different cameras. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is aperture. How much light that a camera can let in. Those numbers range from, say, maybe f1.4 to maybe a base of f5.6. The lower the number, the more light that can be let into a video frame or a picture frame. And finally, the focal length, or how much zoom there is on a camera lens. The reason they don't use 3 times or 4 times zoom is because depending on which camera you put one of these lenses on, that actually might be a bit different because of things like cropped sensors and uncropped sensors and all of that. So it's much easier to really call it a millimeter. That's what you'll commonly know as. Your kit lens, a lens that most people get with their first camera, for example, is 18 to 55. A bit of a wider kind of lens to a little bit of zoom with it as well. There are lenses like, I call it my Sigzuka here, that goes 100 to 600 millimeter. That's a big zoom on a lens. You have wide angle lenses, which can see a much wider field of view. This one, for example, goes all the way down to 10 millimeter. So there are so many different kinds of lenses for the different things that you might be shooting. And so really, the biggest thing when it comes to picking a lens is, what do you plan on actually shooting? If, for example, you're shooting home realty, like rooms or buildings, perhaps cityscapes, weather, for example, you're going to want something more of a wide angle lens. This one, for example, is a Sigma lens, 10 to 20 millimeter, kind of a wider field of view. If you're shooting things like wildlife, you're really into nature and birds and deer and stuff like that, you're going to want what's known as a super telephoto lens, a big zoom on a lens. This one, for example, is 150 to 600 millimeter. That's a big zoom for a lens. And I also use this for things like astrophotography, shooting things like planets in the night sky and nebulas. Now, if you're shooting, for example, portraits, if you plan on mainly shooting people or animals or things like that, there's really kind of a few specific lenses for you, and one of which is actually one of the most budget-friendly. One of the lenses I highly recommend almost everybody get is a Canon 50 millimeter lens. Of course, if you're on the Canon front, a 50 millimeter lens at f1.8. There are similar versions for other camera bodies as well. But this lens is a fantastic lens. It's a low light performing lens, so aperture all the way down to f1.8. That allows a lot of light into a lens. And at 50 millimeter, it's a good kind of tighter frame for you shooting people at a good distance. Now, important to note with aperture, the lower the aperture, one, the more light that gets allowed in. So if you're shooting things more at night or darker locations, that f-stop becomes a lot more important to you. For example, if you're shooting sports photography, you might want some type of telephoto lens for football, but you also want to make sure the aperture is pretty low. So a very common lens that a lot of people use are Canon's f2.8 70 to 200 millimeter lens. That's a great lens for photography. It's a good low light performing lens. Also has a good amount of zoom with it as well. Now, there is a lesser expensive version, a 70 to 200 f4 lens. It's not as good in darker situations like sports, but it's still pretty darn good. The other thing with aperture is that it allows you to be a little bit more artistic with your shots. The lower the aperture, the more blurred you can make the background of a photograph.
So this is at f1.4. You'll probably notice the background is very blurry. This is where those really low aperture lenses like that 50 millimeter f1.8 or this 35 millimeter f1.4 really excel. Now what we can do is crank the f-stop all the way back up to f, maybe too high. So now we're all the way at f16, and you'll see the background doesn't quite have that blur that it did. The beautiful thing with those really, really low aperture number lenses is that you can really blur that background for those beautiful pictures.
Now there are other lenses that are kind of like the all-around lenses, and that's really the lens I recommend the most if you're just getting into photography or video and you don't really know what you want to do with your camera yet. One of the lenses I use probably 90% of the time is this lens by Canon. It's an 18 to 135 millimeter. It only goes down to f3.5 at 18 millimeters, so it's not a great low light performing lens. However, it has a good amount of zoom for different situations. It's great for really almost anything that I shoot. And again, this is really my daily driver for nearly everything that I do. I prefer lenses that have more variety in terms of their zoom. So when you're first getting your camera, you're going to have the option of picking up that kit lens with your camera body. They tend to be pretty affordable, roughly around $50 extra comparing to buying just the body only. Is it worth it? If you're really just beginning, I would say it's a pretty good lens for you. I really do think kit lenses do a good job at just the bare bones essentials of getting used to your camera. However, if you do have a little bit more money to spend, I would recommend getting kind of an all-around lens like this 18 to 135, just because it does offer you a little bit more versatility in your shooting. And of course, if you are just getting a camera for the first time, but you know you plan on shooting portraits only, then just get the Canon 50mm lens. Get a lens that's really specific for what you're doing, so you're not wasting money on a lens you're probably never going to use. I own a bunch of different lenses, and really, I use this one maybe 1% of the time. This lens I don't even use anymore. This lens is a decent amount for portraits and kind of things like that. Never use my kit lens. Wide-angle lenses I do use a lot for weather type of things, and so, you know, having a variety of lenses is not a bad idea. It is good to have kind of a variety of different lenses that you can use. But if you are doing something that's very specific, then just get the lens that you're actually going to need. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. I hope that video was informational for you. I hope that did help facilitate your lens buying decision. So bottom line, if you're looking to shoot portraits, I cannot recommend this Canon 50mm lens f1.8 enough. If you're looking to be more of an all-around shooter, don't really know what you're shooting yet, this 18 to 135mm lens by Canon is my other high recommendation for you. If you're looking for things like a wide-angle lens, there are a lot of different wide-angle lenses out there, but this Sigma 10 to 20mm, it's a great wide-angle lens at a much more affordable cost as well. So there's just a few of my recommendations. If you have any questions, please leave a comment. I'll be scrolling through those periodically and happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you for watching. If you're interested in other content I do have a lot of stuff on weather, documentaries on weather that I've been making, some stuff on space and all sorts of weird stuff on this channel. Computers, something that I'm really big into as well, unboxing videos for that, and eventually, whenever I can get my hands on an RTX 3080, I do plan on doing a full computer build with an RTX 3080 and probably the new AMD flagship CPUs as well. So hopefully I can actually buy one of those soon. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll see you again in the next video.